Close your eyes for a moment. Not fully, just enough to let the edges of the world soften. Now, imagine Earth. Not the Earth you know. No traffic, no phones glowing in the dark, no cities humming, no late-night snacks from the fridge. Go back, way back. There are no cities, no writing scratched into stone, no pottery cooling beside a fire, no taverns, no mugs, no barrels, no idea what a drink even is. Just land, sky, wind. The air smells green, wet soil, leaves, tree bark warmed by the sun. Humans are here, but they are not kings, not farmers, not merchants. They are hunter-gatherers. They walk slowly through forests and across open grass. They listen more than they speak. They know which roots are safe, which berries bite back, which trees give sweet fruit in late summer. The world is not a place they own. It is a pantry. Everything they eat comes from what they can find. Fallen fruit, nuts cracked open with stones, honey stolen carefully, sometimes bravely, from buzzing hives. And sometimes something else. Because fermentation does not wait for humans to invent it. It does not ask permission. Fermentation just happens. When fruit falls from a tree and splits open on warm ground, tiny invisible helpers begin their quiet work. Yeast, floating in the air, settles onto the sugar. The sun warms the juice. The skin softens. Bubbles form. The fruit changes. Not rotten, not yet, just different. A little fizzy, a little sharp, a little strange. And animals notice. Picture a small clearing. Sunlight slipping through branches, fallen fruit scattered in the grass. The warmth of the afternoon sitting heavy and soft. A deer steps forward, sniffs, takes a bite. Somewhere else, monkeys gather under a tree thick with overripe fruit. They chatter, they chew, they sway a little more than usual. Birds peck at berries that have been resting in the heat for days. The forest is quiet, but not completely still, because something subtle is happening. The sugar inside that fruit has begun to turn into alcohol. Not in a brewery, not in a clay jar. Just right there on the forest floor. Nature made the first batch. No labels, no warning signs. Just fallen fruit in the warmth of the sun. Now, imagine early humans walking into this scene. They are hungry. They are always a little hungry. Food is not guaranteed. Every berry matters. Every scrap counts. They see the fruit. They smell it. Maybe it smells sweeter than usual. Maybe it smells stronger. Maybe it smells like something just on the edge of going bad. But hunger makes you brave. They pick it up. They taste it. What happens next? We do not know the exact moment. There is no record, no diary entry that says, "Today I felt funny after the berries." But we can imagine. A warmth spreading through the chest, a slight wobble in the step, A giggle that comes easier than usual. Maybe someone laughed for no clear reason. Maybe someone tripped and then laughed harder. Maybe someone felt bold for a moment. Or maybe nothing dramatic happened at all. Just a subtle shift. A softness around the edges of the day. The forest still quiet. The fallen fruit still warm in the sun. Over time, they would notice patterns. Fruit left too long in the heat tasted different. Fruit freshly picked did not. Animals acted differently after eating certain fallen fruit. Humans are observers. That is how they survive. They watch. They remember. So the question rises gently, like a bubble in warm juice. Did they notice? Did they connect the feeling to the fruit? Did someone, somewhere, decide to eat the overripe ones on purpose? We cannot hear their conversations, but we know this. Fermentation has been happening for millions of years. Long before humans, long before villages, long before the idea of drinking. The ingredients were always there. Fruit, sugar, warmth of the sun, time, and quiet forests. Always the quiet forests. Picture it again. Fallen fruit scattered under a tree. The skin split open. Juice sticky in the grass. Insects buzzing lazily. The warmth of the sun pressing down. A human hand reaching down. Not knowing they are touching the beginning of something that will one day fill goblets, inspire songs, start arguments, seal treaties, and ruin mornings. For now, it is simple. Just fruit. Just warmth. Just a quiet forest holding its breath. And maybe, just maybe, the first tiny spark of curiosity. Because before there were breweries, before there were feasts, before there were warnings about one too many, there was this. Fallen fruit, the warmth of the sun, and humans walking slowly through the quiet forests. Let's stay in the forest a little longer. Nothing rushes here. Nothing announces itself loudly. The fruit is still on the ground, still warm from the sun, still soft and splitting open in the grass. And now we slow down and look closer, because something small is happening, very small. Fermentation sounds like a big word, but it is not dramatic. It is quiet work. Fermentation is what happens when tiny living things, called yeast, eat sugar. That's it. Yeast is everywhere, in the air, on fruit skins, on leaves, floating around without a plan. You can't see it, you don't feel it land, but it's there. When fruit ripens, it fills with sugar, sweet, sticky sugar. And when that fruit breaks open, the yeast finds it. For yeast, sugar is food. They eat. And when they eat sugar, they turn it into two things, carbon dioxide and alcohol. The bubbles you sometimes see, that's the carbon dioxide. The slight sharp smell, that's the alcohol. No one in the prehistoric forest knew the word ethanol. No one measured percentages, but the process was already working. Imagine a pile of berries that have been sitting for days, the sun warming them, the juice leaking out, the air thick and sweet. The yeast arrives quietly. It always does. The sugar begins to change, slowly, softly. The fruit becomes slightly alcoholic. Not strong, not like a modern drink, just enough. Enough to notice. Animals notice first. They often do. There are stories, modern observations, of elephants eating overripe marula fruit and behaving differently, of monkeys swaying after feasting under a tree, even birds flying in less than perfect straight lines. Some of these stories are exaggerated, some are debated, but the idea itself is simple and real. Fruit in the wild can ferment on its own. Now, imagine early humans coming across that same fruit. They are curious creatures. They taste everything carefully, yes, but also bravely. Maybe the fruit tastes sweeter than usual. Maybe it has a slight fizz. Maybe it makes the mouth tingle just a little. And after eating enough of it, something changes. Not wildly, not like a festival, just a light warmth in the body, a slower blink, a softer mood, light intoxication. Long before anyone thought of brewing, long before clay pots were shaped, long before someone decided to store juice on purpose, this would have been accidental. No recipe, no waiting period, no plan. Just fruit left too long in the sun. Now here is where we step gently into archaeology. Because we have imagination, but we also have evidence. Direct evidence of the very first accidental intoxication? That is hard. Alcohol does not fossilize neatly. A tipsy afternoon leaves no stone carving. But scientists have found traces of early fermentation in ancient pottery much later in history. Residues of fermented honey, fruit, and grains. Those findings tell us this. Once humans began storing liquids in containers, fermentation became easier to control. But before containers? It was probably the forest itself that acted as the first brewing space. Archaeologists speculate, carefully, that early humans must have encountered naturally fermented fruit. It would almost be impossible not to. Warm climates, sweet fruit, time. The ingredients were always there. Still, speculation is not certainty. We do not have a cave painting of someone wobbling after berries. We do not have a stone tablet reading, "Note to self, avoid fruit from yesterday." So we sit in that gentle uncertainty, curious, calm. Picture a small group resting in the shade. The day's hunt finished, the light beginning to soften. Someone passes around gathered fruit. They eat. They talk quietly. Maybe laughter lingers a little longer than usual. Maybe the world feels slightly lighter for an hour. Then the feeling fades. The forest returns to normal. No grand discovery, no celebration. Just another experience folded into memory. Over time, patterns would become clearer. Fruit left in warmth behaves differently. Fruit eaten fresh does not. Early humans were excellent pattern watchers. Their survival depended on it. So maybe someone thought, what if we keep it? What if we let it sit? But that is for later. For now, we stay here, in the wild, where fermentation is not an invention, not a technology, not even a decision, Just yeast in the air, sugar in the fruit, warmth of the sun, and humans tasting something slightly new. Fallen fruit, overripe sweetness, a quiet forest, and the smallest shift in how the world feels. Now we move forward, very slowly, out of the deep forest, out of pure accident, and into something new. We are in what is now northern China, a place archaeologists call Jiahu. The time is around 7,000 to 6,600 BCE. That is about 9,000 years ago. There are still no skyscrapers, no written books, but something important has changed. People are no longer only wandering, they are settling. They are building simple homes, growing rice, keeping animals, making tools, and, maybe most important for our story, they are making pottery. Clay shaped by hand, dried, fired, hardened. For the first time, liquids can be stored safely, and this changes everything. At Jiahu, archaeologists found broken pottery jars buried in the soil. Ordinary-looking fragments at first glance, nothing flashy, just pieces of old containers. But inside those pieces, there were traces, very tiny traces. When scientists examined the residue left inside the pottery, they found chemical signatures, specific molecules, markers that suggest something fermented had once been there. The mixture appears to have included rice, honey, and fruit. Not just fruit fallen by accident, not just chance fermentation on the forest floor. This looks intentional. Rice provides starch, honey provides sugar, fruit adds flavor and more sugar. Together, left in a container, they would ferment. Yeast in the air would still do the work. It always does. But now the process could happen inside a jar. Inside pottery, fermentation is easier to control. The liquid does not soak into the ground. It does not scatter. It gathers. It deepens. Pottery created a space where transformation could continue undisturbed. And that is the quiet revolution. Now let's pause gently and ask, how do archaeologists even know this? After thousands of years, the liquid itself is long gone. No ancient drinks sloshing around inside. But chemicals leave fingerprints. When fermented beverages dry inside a pot, small traces of organic compounds remain absorbed into the clay. Things like tartaric acid from fruit, chemical markers linked to rice fermentation, beeswax residues from honey. Scientists carefully scrape microscopic samples from the pottery surface. They test them using modern tools, machines that can detect chemical patterns at extremely small levels. It is almost like reading a faded ghost of a recipe. Not the full instructions, but enough to whisper what was once there. And in Jiahu's case, the whisper is clear. This was a fermented drink, possibly one of the earliest known examples in the world. Now, imagine the scene. A small Neolithic village, houses of packed earth, smoke drifting upward in the evening, rice fields nearby, the rhythm of planting and harvesting shaping the year. Inside one home, a clay jar rests in the corner. It holds a mixture of rice, honey, and fruit, left to sit, left to change. Days pass. The mixture bubbles gently, The scent grows richer, slightly sweet, slightly sharp. Someone lifts the jar, pours the liquid into simple cups. This is no longer purely accidental. This is shared. Communal drinking likely followed. Fermented beverages are rarely solitary discoveries for long. They are poured, passed, tasted together. Perhaps during rituals, perhaps during seasonal gatherings, perhaps simply at the end of a long day. We cannot hear their voices, but we can imagine quiet laughter around a small fire, the warmth of the drink, the warmth of community. And this is another shift. Alcohol is no longer just a surprise found under a tree. It is prepared, stored, anticipated. Pottery made that possible. Without containers, fermentation is brief and scattered. With containers, it becomes a practice, a tradition. The jars at Jiahu do not shout their story. They sit silently in museums now. But their chemical traces tell us that by 7,000 BCE, humans were already experimenting, already blending ingredients, already waiting for yeast to do its quiet work. Rice, honey, fruit, time, and clay shaped by careful hands. From fallen fruit in the forest to deliberate mixtures resting in pottery. The warmth of the sun still matters. The yeast in the air still matters. But now, human intention has joined the process. And in a small village long ago, someone lifted a cup, not knowing they were part of a story that would stretch thousands of years into the future. Now we drift west, to a land between two rivers, the Tigris, the Euphrates. This region is called Mesopotamia. The name simply means between rivers. It is warm there, flat, fertile. Mud sticks to your sandals. Reeds grow thick along the water. By around 4000 BCE, people here are no longer experimenting quietly. They are building cities. One of the earliest civilizations rises here, Sumer. And in Sumer, beer becomes part of daily life. Not rare, not mysterious, normal. Grain grows well in this river-fed soil, barley especially. And when barley is soaked, sprouted, dried, crushed, and mixed with water, fermentation begins. Yeast is still floating in the air, still doing what yeast does. Only now, humans are guiding it. We even have a poem about it. It is called The Hymn to Ninkasi. Ninkasi was the goddess of beer. Yes, a goddess of beer. The hymn is both a prayer and a recipe. It describes soaking the grain, baking bread from it, crumbling that bread into water, letting it ferment in large vats. It reads slowly, repetitively, almost soothing, as if brewing itself is a rhythm. Now imagine the city at dawn. Mud brick houses, narrow streets, donkeys shifting lazily. The river moving beside everything, steady and calm. Workers rise early. Farmers, builders, temple laborers. They eat bread, they drink beer. But this beer is not what you imagine from a cold glass today. It is thick, cloudy, more like a porridge than a clear drink. Nutritious, filling. It contains bits of grain. It provides calories. It is safer than river water, which can carry disease. The brewing process makes it cleaner to drink. So beer becomes daily nutrition. Even children may have consumed weaker versions. Large clay jars sit in homes and workshops. When people drink, they often do so together, from a shared vessel. And because the beer is thick and filled with grain solids, they use long reeds as straws. You lean forward, dip the straw into the jar, sip slowly. No clinking glasses, no foam spilling over the rim. Just a quiet pull through a hollow reed. Beer is not only food, it is also payment. In Sumer, workers were sometimes paid in beer rations. Records carved into clay tablets list daily allotments. So, after a day of hauling bricks under the sun, a worker might receive grain and beer, wages measured in sustenance. There is something steady about it. The sun rises, work begins. Grain is harvested, grain is ground, bread is baked. Bread becomes beer. The cycle continues. In temples, beer is offered to the gods. In homes, it is shared among family. In gatherings, it softens conversation. Not wild drunkenness, not constant celebration, just part of the rhythm. Life in ancient Mesopotamia moves with the river. Flood and drought, planting and harvest. And somewhere in nearly every household, fermentation bubbles clay. The scent of grain, the warmth of the air, the slow work of yeast. Beer becomes woven into civilization itself, from accidental fruit under trees, to pottery in Neolithic villages, and now to organized brewing in one of the world's first cities. The process is no longer hidden. It is sung about, praised, measured, distributed. The goddess Ninkasi watches over it, at least in story. And as the evening cools the mud-brick walls, families gather. A jar sits between them. Long straws dip in. Sip. The day softens. Outside, the river continues its slow, ancient flow. Now we drift north, away from the hot river plains of Mesopotamia, toward hills, toward mountains, toward the region we now call Georgia in the Caucasus. Around 6000 BCE, something quiet but important is happening here. Grapes are being used in a new way. Archaeologists have found evidence of early wine production from this time. Chemical traces inside pottery, tartaric acid, a strong marker of grapes, suggest that people were fermenting grape juice intentionally, not by accident under a tree, but on purpose. This region is one of the earliest known places where grapes were domesticated. Wild vines once climbed freely through forests, but over time, humans selected sweeter grapes, bigger grapes, more reliable vines. They guided the plant, slowly, and the grape responded. Now imagine a Neolithic settlement nestled near gentle hills. The air is cooler than Mesopotamia. The soil is rich. Grapevines stretch along wooden supports. Leaves rustle softly in the breeze. Harvest time comes. Clusters of grapes are picked by hand, carried in baskets, crushed, perhaps by foot, perhaps by hand, until juice runs freely. And here is where something special happens. The juice is poured into large clay vessels called qvevri. Qvevri are big, egg-shaped, made of clay, and instead of sitting on shelves, they are buried underground. The earth keeps them cool, keeps the temperature steady. Inside the qvevri, The grape juice ferments. Skins, seeds, stems, all left together in the vessel. Yeast, again, comes from the air and from the grape skins themselves. Grapes carry natural yeast on their surface. No need to search for it. Fermentation begins gently. Bubbles rise. Sugars turn into alcohol. Days pass, then weeks. The earth above the buried jar stays quiet. Grass grows. Wind moves through trees. Below, wine is forming. Now let's pause and gently notice something. Wine is different from beer. Beer begins with grain, barley or other cereals. Grain is mostly starch. To ferment it, humans must first convert starch into sugar, often by sprouting the grain or baking it into bread. It is a multi-step process. Wine is simpler. Grapes are already full of sugar, sweet and ready. When crushed, they release sugary juice. Yeast meets sugar. Fermentation begins almost immediately. No baking, no sprouting, just fruit and time. This gives wine a different character. Beer is often cloudy, thick, nourishing, a food as much as a drink. Wine is thinner, lighter in texture, often clearer. Beer grows from fields of grain. Wine grows from vines clinging to hillsides. And in ancient Georgia, wine becomes more than nutrition. It becomes ritual. Wine is poured during ceremonies, offered in gatherings, shared when guests arrive. Hospitality in the Caucasus has deep roots. Even today, welcoming a guest often means offering wine. Imagine an early village gathering. The qvevri has been opened. The fermented liquid is drawn out carefully. Clay cups are filled. A toast may not sound like our modern toasts, but there is meaning in the act. Wine passed from hand to hand, shared. The warmth spreads slowly through the body. The mood softens. Conversations stretch into the evening. Outside, the mountains stand steady and silent. The buried jars continue their quiet work year after year. Harvest, crush, ferment, share. The cycle repeats, from wild fruit in forests to rice and honey mixtures in China, to barley beer in Sumer, and now to grape wine resting beneath the soil of the Caucasus. Each step more intentional, each step more woven into culture. The yeast still invisible, the sugar still essential, the warmth still important. But now the drink carries symbolism, identity, tradition. In the cool earth of Georgia, beneath layers of soil and stone, wine waits patiently. And when it is lifted from the ground, it carries not just alcohol, but community, memory, and the quiet rhythm of the vine. Now we follow the river again, but not the Tigris, not the Euphrates. We move south and west to the long green ribbon cutting through desert, the Nile. And along its banks rises one of the most recognizable civilizations in history, ancient Egypt. The land beyond the river is dry, harsh, golden sand stretching outward. But near the Nile, life gathers. Fields of grain, date palms, mud brick homes, boats drifting slowly along calm water. Here, alcohol is not hidden, not rare. It is part of daily life. Beer, in particular, becomes essential. Workers who built monuments, like the pyramids, were often given beer as part of their rations, not as a luxury, as sustenance. Egyptian beer was thick, nourishing, and slightly sour, made from barley or emmer wheat. Bread was baked lightly, then crumbled into water. The mixture fermented naturally. The result was cloudy, filling, safer than untreated river water. Imagine the rhythm of a workday near the construction of a pyramid. The sun rising slowly over limestone blocks. Workers lifting, hauling, shaping stone. The heat building by midday. At rest periods, jars of beer are distributed. Men sit in the shade. They drink from simple cups. No celebration, just relief. Just hydration mixed with calories. The day continues. Beer was common, practical, shared by many. Wine, however, was different. Wine in ancient Egypt was often associated with the elite, nobles, priests, pharaohs. Grapes were grown in certain regions, and wine production required more resources. It was less common than beer, and often reserved for higher status. Large wine jars have been found in tombs, sealed and labeled with details. Some even listed the vineyard, the year, and the name of the winemaker. It feels surprisingly modern. Wine was placed in tombs because it was meant to accompany the dead into the afterlife. A comfort, a continuation of earthly pleasures. Alcohol also held a place in religious rituals. Offerings of beer and wine were made to the gods, poured carefully before statues, placed on temple altars. There were festivals too. One well-known celebration honored the goddess Hathor. During certain festivals, participants drank heavily as part of ritual. Controlled intoxication meant to bring joy, release, and connection with the divine, not chaos. Structured celebration. The idea was not simply to drink for escape, but to enter a different state, one believed to have spiritual meaning. Tomb paintings give us quiet glimpses of this world. Scenes carved and painted on walls show workers brewing beer, women straining liquid through cloth, servants pouring wine at banquets, guests reclining on cushions, cups in hand, musicians playing softly nearby. The images are calm, orderly. Even the feasts look structured. You see jars lined up neatly, grapes being pressed, grain being measured. Alcohol here is not accidental anymore, not experimental. It is organized, managed, integrated into economy and belief. Beer for the many, wine for the few, both part of the rhythm of the Nile. Picture evening along the river, the sky fading from gold to deep blue, the air cooling at last. In homes of workers, beer is poured into simple cups. In larger houses, wine flows into decorated vessels. Laughter rises softly from open doorways. Somewhere nearby, temple rituals continue by torchlight. Offerings made, hymns spoken. And in tombs prepared for eternity, sealed jars of wine wait patiently beside carved walls. From forest fruit to buried qvevri, to clay jars along the Nile, alcohol now stands firmly inside civilization. Not wild, not hidden, but steady, like the river itself. Now we move gently west again, across the sea, to hills covered in olive trees, to white stone glowing in afternoon light, to ancient Greece. Here, wine is not just consumed, it is discussed. In Greece, drinking often takes place at something called a symposium. The word means drinking together, but it is more than that. A symposium is a structured gathering. Men recline on couches arranged around a room, cushions beneath their arms, oil lamps flickering softly, music sometimes drifting in from a lyre. At the center sits a large bowl called a crater. Wine is poured into it. And then something important happens. Water is added. The Greeks did not usually drink wine straight. They diluted it, often 3 parts water to 1 part wine, sometimes more. Drinking undiluted wine was considered uncivilized, even dangerous. Wine was powerful, but it was meant to be guided, slowly ladled from the crater into individual cups, often shallow, wide cups called pulques. The cup is lifted, a sip is taken, conversation begins. This is not chaotic drinking, not loud disorder. The symposium follows rules. There is often a leader of the gathering who decides how strong the mixture will be, how quickly cups will be refilled. Drinking is paced. Between sips there is talk, philosophy, poetry, politics, love, the nature of the soul. Wine softens the mind just enough to loosen speech, but not enough to destroy it. At least, that is the goal. Moderation is valued. The Greeks believed in balance. The word sophrosyne described self-control, harmony, knowing your limits. To drink moderately was a virtue. To lose control completely was embarrassing, childish. The structure of the symposium reflects Greek society itself. Not everyone attends. Women of citizen status typically do not participate in these gatherings. Slaves may serve the wine. Entertainers may perform music or dance. There is hierarchy, order. Even intoxication has a social structure. Picture the room again. Reclining figures, clay cups painted with scenes of gods and heroes, a crater in the center holding diluted wine. Outside, the night air cools the stone streets. Inside, voices rise and fall gently. A philosophical question floats through the room. Someone laughs. Someone responds thoughtfully. Another sip. Wine in Greece is connected to the god Dionysus, a god of wine, theater, and transformation. But even in honoring Dionysus, there is tension between freedom and restraint, between ecstasy and control. The symposium sits in that middle space. Not total abandon, not strict denial. Just enough wine to warm the mind, just enough to explore ideas without losing oneself. From thick beer in Mesopotamia to buried qvevri in Georgia, to structured gatherings in Greece, alcohol continues to evolve. Now it is paired with thought, paired with discussion, paired with the careful art of moderation. The crater stands quietly in the center, wine and water blended together, balance in liquid form. A cup is raised slowly, a sip, and the conversation drifts on into the soft Mediterranean night. Now we move west again, further along the Mediterranean. Stone roads stretch straight into the distance. Aqueducts cross valleys. Markets hum quietly in the morning light. We arrive in ancient Rome. Rome is large, organized, layered with classes and customs. And yes, Romans drank, but not quite in the way modern imagination sometimes suggests. Let's slow it down. Wine is common in Rome, very common. It is produced across Italy and traded widely. Amphorae, tall clay jars, carry wine across the empire. But like the Greeks, Romans usually dilute their wine with water. Drinking it straight is seen as excessive, barbaric. Water is mixed in, often 2 or 3 parts to 1 part wine, sometimes more. So daily Roman wine is lighter than many modern wines. Now imagine the Roman soldier, marching long distances, carrying equipment, setting up camps at dusk. He often drinks something called posca. Posca is not luxury wine. It is water mixed with sour wine or vinegar. Sometimes herbs are added. It is sharp, refreshing. It makes questionable water safer, and it is practical. This is not a grand banquet drink. It is hydration for long days. Now step into a Roman city street. There are small food shops called thermopolia. You can still see them in the ruins of Pompeii. Counters with built-in clay jars where food and drink were stored. There are also taverns, places where ordinary people gather. Laborers, merchants, travelers. Wine is poured, bread is eaten, conversation flows. These spaces are lively, but not always chaotic. Now, here is where we gently untangle a myth. Were Romans constantly drunk? Not exactly. Yes, drunkenness existed. Writers like Juvenal and Seneca complained about excess. Satirical poems mock those who overindulge. But satire exaggerates. Most daily drinking was moderate. Diluted wine with meals, small amounts spread through the day. Alcohol was woven into routine, not always into reckless celebration. Social class also shaped drinking habits. The wealthy could afford higher quality wine, aged varieties, imported flavors. They hosted elaborate banquets with multiple courses, reclining guests, decorative cups. The poor drank simpler wine, often rough, sometimes already slightly sour. But both groups diluted it. Both understood that too much brought embarrassment. There were festivals, of course, public celebrations where drinking increased. Saturnalia, for example, loosened social rules temporarily. But even then, it was ritualized excess, not permanent chaos. Picture an ordinary Roman evening. The heat of the day fading, the streets quieter now. Oil lamps glowing in windows. Inside a modest home, a jug of diluted wine sits on the table. Bread is broken. Olives passed around. A small cup is filled. A sip. The drink is light, slightly sour, enough to relax the muscles after work, enough to ease conversation, but not enough to erase the world. Rome was disciplined in many ways. Military precision, legal structure, clear hierarchies. Alcohol fit into that structure. Managed, expected, normal. Yes, there were drunks. Every society has them. But the image of an empire staggering endlessly through wine-soaked streets is not quite accurate. More often, it was controlled, diluted, measured. From forest fruit to clay jars in China, to beer rations in Egypt, to philosophical symposia in Greece, and now to Rome's steady, everyday cup. Wine as habit. Wine as hydration, wine as social glue. The empire stretches wide, roads humming quietly beneath sandaled feet. And somewhere, in a simple Roman kitchen, Diluted wine waits in a clay jug. Not dramatic, just part of the rhythm of the day. Now we move forward again. The Roman roads have faded. Empires have shifted. Stone castles rise in the distance. Villages cluster around churches. Smoke curls gently from low chimneys. We are in medieval Europe. Life here is slower. Fields of barley sway under grey skies. Oxen pull ploughs through damp soil. The year is measured in planting and harvest, and in many homes, something is always brewing. Not strong ale, not festival drink, but small beer. Small beer is weak, very weak, often just 1 or 2% alcohol. It is made from the same grains as stronger beer, but brewed quickly and lightly. Sometimes it is made from the second run of grains already used once. The result is cloudy, mild, slightly sour. Children may drink it, workers drink it daily. It is part of the table. Now step inside a stone kitchen. The walls are rough, cool to the touch. The floor packed earth or simple stone. A fire burns low in the hearth. Above it hangs a pot. Grain and water simmer together. The scent is warm, bready. After boiling, the liquid cools. Yeast, wild or saved from earlier batches, does its quiet work. The mixture ferments in wooden barrels. Barrels line the wall, sturdy oak, iron hoops holding them tight. Brewing is not industrial, it is domestic. Many households brew their own, especially women, who are often responsible for ale making. The word brewster once referred to a female brewer. It is part of routine life. Now we gently approach the question of water. You may have heard that people drank beer because water was unsafe. This is partly true. In crowded medieval towns, water sources could become contaminated. Waste flowed into rivers. Wells were not always protected. Boiling water for brewing helped kill many harmful microbes. The alcohol content, even if small, also discouraged some bacterial growth. So small beer was often safer than questionable urban water. But this does not mean all medieval water was deadly. In rural areas, clean springs and wells provided fresh water. People did drink plain water. So the idea that everyone was constantly drinking beer because water was poison is an exaggeration. Still, small beer was reliable, familiar, and so it became woven into daily rhythm. Now let us step into a monastery. Stone cloisters, quiet courtyards, rows of herbs growing in careful order. Monks rise before dawn, pray, work, pray again. Many monasteries become known for brewing. Brewing requires patience, cleanliness, record-keeping. Monks have time, discipline, structure. Inside monastery walls, brewing traditions grow refined. Recipes improve. Techniques become consistent. Barrels are stored in cool cellars. Fermentation is watched carefully. Beer here is nourishment. It is also hospitality. Travelers may receive bread and ale within the monastery walls. Season shapes everything. In autumn, grain is harvested. Brewing increases. Fresh ale is made as the air cools. In winter, barrels rest in cold cellars. fermentation slows. In spring, brewing resumes with new grain. Summer heat can spoil batches, so brewing schedules adjust with temperature. Life and fermentation move together. Imagine a winter evening in a small medieval village. Outside, frost gathers on wooden fences. Inside, candlelight flickers against stone walls. A barrel is opened. The ale is poured into simple wooden cups. It is not strong, not sparkling, just steady. The warmth spreads gently through tired limbs. Conversation stays low. The fire crackles softly. From ancient rice mixtures to Sumerian beer rations, to Roman diluted wine, and now to small beer in stone kitchens and wooden barrels. Alcohol has settled into daily survival once again. Not luxury, not philosophy, just nourishment, just rhythm. Grain, water, yeast, time, and the quiet hum of medieval life continuing, one gentle sip at a time. Now we cross an ocean, not in ships, not yet. We travel gently, in thought, to the Americas before European contact. Civilizations are rising here too. Temples step upward toward the sky. Markets hum in open plazas. Fields of maize stretch under bright sun. In Mesoamerica, fermentation is already part of life. One of the most well-known drinks is pulque. Pulque is made from the sap of the maguey plant, a type of agave. The sap, called aguamiel, or honey water, is collected from the plant's center. Left to rest, it ferments naturally. The result is milky, slightly sour, thick, not clear like wine, not bubbly like modern beer. Pulque carries both nourishment and meaning. Among the Aztec Empire, pulque is associated with gods and ritual. There are even deities connected specifically to pulque. But here is something important. Intoxication is controlled. In many Mesoamerican societies, drinking heavily without permission is discouraged, sometimes even punished. Elders may drink, priests may drink during ceremonies, warriors may drink in specific contexts, but public drunkenness by young people, often restricted. There are rules. Now, let us move south. High in the Andes, cool mountain air, terraced hillsides carved into slopes. Here, among Andean cultures, and later the Inca Empire, another fermented drink appears, chicha. Chicha is often made from maize. The maize is soaked, sometimes chewed to begin breaking down starches, then boiled and left to ferment. Like beer, it begins with grain. Like many ancient drinks, it is cloudy and nourishing. Chicha plays a central role in community gatherings. It is shared at festivals, offered to ancestors, poured onto the ground as an offering to the earth itself. Drinking is communal, ceremonial, measured. Now, something softer and quieter. Fermented cacao. In parts of Mesoamerica, cacao, the source of chocolate, was prepared as a drink, often frothed, sometimes spiced. There is evidence that in some contexts, cacao beverages may have undergone light fermentation. Cacao was sacred, associated with elites and ritual. Imagine a carved vessel, painted with symbols, filled with dark liquid, bitter, rich, not a sweet dessert, but something sacred. Now, let us pause and compare gently. In Eurasia, we saw barley beer in Mesopotamia, wine in Greece and Rome, small beer in medieval Europe. In the Americas, the ingredients differ. No barley fields like Sumer, no grape vineyards like Georgia. Instead, agave, maize, cacao. But the pattern feels familiar. Local plants, natural fermentation, ritual structure. Alcohol here is rarely uncontrolled chaos. It is woven into social order. Who drinks, when they drink, how much they drink. The rules matter. Imagine a Mesoamerican village at dusk. A pulque vessel sits near the center of a gathering. Elders speak. Younger members listen. Cups are filled carefully. No rushing. In the Andes, a clay cup of chicha is passed from hand to hand during a harvest celebration. A small amount is poured onto the ground first, an offering. The earth is acknowledged. Across continents, without contact, human societies have discovered similar rhythms. Ferment local crops, share the drink, tie it to ritual, control excess. From forest fruit long ago, to rice wine in China, to beer in Mesopotamia, to wine in Greece, to small beer in Europe, and now to pulque and chicha in the Americas. Different plants, same quiet partnership between yeast and sugar, same gentle warmth spreading through the body, same careful balance between celebration and restraint. The night settles over temple steps and mountain terraces alike. Clay vessels rest in the cool air, and fermentation continues, softly, wherever humans and plants meet. Now we turn toward Africa. Not one place, not one tradition. A vast continent. Deserts, rainforests, savanna grasslands, highlands, coastlines. And in many of these regions, fermentation has long been part of daily life. But it does not look the same everywhere. Let's move slowly. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, sorghum is a key grain. Hardy, drought-resistant, well-suited to warm climates. From sorghum, communities brew beer. Sorghum beer is often cloudy, thick, slightly sour, low in alcohol. Like small beer in medieval Europe, it nourishes as well as relaxes. The grain is soaked, sometimes sprouted, dried, ground, boiled, then left to ferment. Local yeast cultures do the work. And this is important. Yeast is not one universal thing. Different regions carry different strains in the air, on grains, on hands, on tools. So sorghum beer in one village may taste slightly different from that of another, even if the recipe sounds similar. The air itself becomes part of the flavor. Now picture a village courtyard. A large clay pot sits near the center. Women stir the thick mixture with wooden paddles. Children watch. Smoke rises gently from a cooking fire. Brewing here is often communal. It is not hidden in private cellars. It is visible, shared. When the beer is ready, it is poured into calabash gourds, passed around, drunk from a shared container. Conversations rise and fall softly. Now we move to another region, palm wine. In parts of West and Central Africa, sap is tapped from palm trees. The tree is cut carefully. A container is placed to catch the dripping sap. Fresh sap is sweet, but fermentation begins almost immediately. Wild yeast is present inside the collection vessel and in the air. Within hours, the liquid starts to change. Palm wine becomes slightly fizzy, lightly alcoholic. If left longer, it grows stronger and more sour. So timing matters. Palm wine is often drunk fresh, gathered in the morning, shared the same day. Again, local yeast shapes the flavor. Now pause and notice the diversity. Sorghum beer in southern Africa, millet beers in other regions, palm wine along tropical coasts, honey-based drinks in certain communities. Africa's fermentation traditions are not a single story. They are many stories. And in many places, alcohol carries ceremonial meaning. Sorghum beer may be offered during weddings. Palm wine may be poured onto the ground to honor ancestors. In some societies, brewing is tied to rites of passage, initiations, harvest festivals, community decisions. Drinking is rarely random. It follows custom. Who may drink, when they may drink, how much is appropriate. The rules shift from region to region, but structure often remains. Imagine evening settling over a savanna village, the sky turning deep orange, cattle returning, dust hanging softly in the air. A pot of sorghum beer rests in the center of a gathering. Elders speak first. Younger members wait their turn. A gourd passes slowly from hand to hand. The drink is thick, slightly tangy, not designed for speed, designed for presence. In a coastal village, palm wine collected at dawn is poured out before sunset. The container is light, the drink faintly sparkling. Laughter drifts through warm air. Across Africa, fermentation adapts to climate, to crops, to community. From barley in Mesopotamia, to grapes in Georgia, to maize in the Andes, and here, sorghum, millet, palm sap. Different plants, same quiet partnership between humans and microorganisms. Local yeast cultures floating invisibly through warm air, settling on grain, touching sap, beginning their steady work. Fermentation here is not imported, not borrowed. It grows from the land itself, from soil, from trees, from shared memory. And as night falls and stars appear one by one over wide African skies, a clay pot sits at the center of community. Not loud, not rushed, just steady, just shared. Until now, every drink we've met has shared something gentle. Beer, wine, palm sap, sorghum brew, all born from fermentation alone. Fermentation has limits. Yeast works steadily, but it can only tolerate so much alcohol before it slows and stops. Most fermented drinks remain relatively mild, but then something changes. Not in a noisy way, in a laboratory. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars study chemistry with patience and curiosity. One of the names often connected to early distillation is Jabir ibn Hayyan. He lived in the 8th century. Jabir and others like him were not trying to invent party drinks. They were studying substances, purifying liquids, extracting essences for medicine and experimentation. Distillation is a simple idea. You heat a liquid. Alcohol evaporates at a lower temperature than water. The vapor rises. It travels through a tube. It cools. It condenses back into liquid. What you collect is stronger, more concentrated. The tool often used is called an alembic, a rounded vessel with a curved neck that guides vapor into a receiving container. Calm, controlled. At first, distilled alcohol is used mostly for medicinal purposes, as antiseptic, as solvent for herbs, as aqua vita, water of life. It is not yet common at dinner tables, but knowledge travels. Over centuries, distillation techniques move into Europe. Monasteries experiment. Apothecaries refine methods. Wine can be distilled into brandy. Grain mash can be distilled into what later becomes whiskey. Fermented rye or potatoes can become vodka. The base ingredients are familiar: grapes, barley, rye, potatoes. But the result is different. Fermentation alone gives drinks of maybe 5 to 15% alcohol. Distillation can push that much higher. The warmth spreads faster. The effect is stronger. And this shifts culture slowly. Spirits are easier to transport. A small barrel holds more potency than many barrels of beer. They keep longer. They resist spoilage. They can be sipped in small amounts or consumed too quickly. Again, there is no need for drama. Distillation does not instantly transform society into chaos, but it does change the landscape. Stronger alcohol means different rituals. Brandy served after meals, whiskey warming hands in colder climates, vodka woven into Eastern European customs. In some places, distilled spirits remain medicinal for centuries. In others, they become commercial goods, taxed, traded, regulated. Picture a medieval European monastery. Stone walls, quiet corridors. In a small chamber, an alembic sits above a low flame. A monk watches carefully. Drops collect slowly in a glass vessel. Not rushed, not reckless. Just curiosity turned into technique. Distillation is not the end of fermentation. Beer and wine continue. But now there is a new branch on the tree. More concentrated, more portable. From fallen fruit in quiet forests, to clay jars in ancient villages, to structured wine in Greece, to sorghum and palm wine under African skies, and now to vapor rising through curved glass. Heat, steam, condensed drops falling into a waiting container. Stronger, clearer, still born from sugar and yeast, but refined through fire. And as the liquid settles into its new vessel, the world of alcohol becomes just a little more intense. Quietly, gradually, without announcement. Now the horizon opens. Land falls away. Water stretches in every direction. We enter the age of ships, tall masts, canvas sails snapping softly in wind, wooden hulls creaking with each slow rise and fall of the sea. Long voyages begin to shape the world, and alcohol comes aboard. On ships, fresh water does not stay fresh for long. Stored in wooden casks, it can grow stale, sour, contaminated. So sailors are given rations that include alcohol. Beer at first. In earlier centuries, English ships carried barrels of beer for daily distribution. But beer spoils. It takes space. It grows flat. As trade routes expand into warmer climates, something stronger begins to travel more easily. Rum. Rum is distilled from sugarcane byproducts, molasses, especially in the Caribbean. It is strong. It keeps well. It takes up less space than beer for the same effect. In the Royal Navy, rum becomes a standard ration. Sailors receive a daily portion, often diluted with water. This mixture is later known as grog. The routine is steady. Morning light, deck scrubbed clean, rations measured carefully. A small ladle poured into tin cups. Not chaos, structure. Alcohol at sea is less about celebration and more about endurance. Months away from land. Salt in the air. Sails straining against wind. A measured ration gives warmth, predictability, something to mark the day. Now we zoom out slowly. Ships are not just carrying sailors, they are carrying goods, spices, silk, sugar, tobacco, and barrels of spirits. Trade routes weave across oceans, Europe to Africa, Africa to the Americas back to Europe. Alcohol moves along these routes, sometimes as cargo, sometimes as currency. In parts of West Africa during the Atlantic trade era, European traders exchanged goods, including alcohol, for other commodities. Rum, in particular, becomes entangled in global trade systems. Barrels stack in port cities. Wooden docks groan under weight. The smell of tar, salt, molasses. Alcohol becomes portable wealth. A barrel can be traded, stored, sold, taxed. Governments begin to regulate it more tightly. Taxes on spirits become significant sources of revenue. In some colonies, disputes over alcohol taxes even spark unrest. But let us keep the pace calm. Picture a quiet evening aboard a ship crossing the Atlantic. The sky deep blue, stars scattered wide above dark water. The crew gathers after duty. A measured ration is poured. They sit against coils of rope. The ship rocks gently beneath them. A sip. The sea stretches endless. Rum does not erase the danger of storms. It does not shorten the voyage, but it becomes part of maritime rhythm. From vineyard hills in Georgia to monastery cellars in Europe, and now to wooden decks rolling over deep oceans, alcohol adapts again. It becomes lighter to carry, stronger in concentration, intertwined with empire and exploration. Ships move forward. Trade winds push them west and east. Barrels rest below deck. Salt air settles over everything. And somewhere, in the dim hold of a ship bound for distant shores, liquid waits quietly in wood. Now we leave the open sea. We step into a city, narrow streets, brick buildings pressed close together, smoke hanging low in the air. We are in 18th century London, and something unusual is happening. It will later be called The gin craze. Gin arrives in England earlier, influenced by Dutch distilling traditions, but in the early 1700s, production increases sharply. Grain is plentiful, distillation is understood, and gin becomes very cheap. Cheaper than beer in many cases. Easier to produce, easier to transport. Small shops appear across the city, simple storefronts selling gin in cups or small containers. The drink is strong, much stronger than the diluted wines and small beers of earlier centuries. And London is changing too. The population is growing quickly. Rural workers move into the city. Housing becomes crowded. Work is inconsistent. Poverty increases in certain districts. In this environment, cheap distilled alcohol spreads rapidly. It is accessible. It is immediate. It does not require long fermentation or careful aging. Now, it is important to slow down and separate image from exaggeration. Writers and artists of the time often dramatized what they saw. One famous engraving, Gin Lane by William Hogarth, shows extreme scenes of neglect and chaos. But satire amplifies. Not every street looked like that engraving. Not every citizen was constantly intoxicated. Still, records show that gin consumption rose dramatically during certain decades. Government officials grew concerned, not from moral panic alone, but from practical worries. Public disorder, declining worker productivity, strain on urban stability. In response, Parliament introduced a series of laws known as the Gin Acts. Early attempts at regulation were not very effective. Taxes were raised, licenses required. Some measures simply drove sales underground. But eventually, in 1751, stricter and more structured regulations began to reduce uncontrolled sales. The state had entered the conversation. Up until now, alcohol had mostly been woven quietly into daily life. In London, during the gin craze, alcohol becomes something else. A policy issue, a subject of debate, a focus of regulation. Picture a small gin shop at dusk, a wooden counter, a few stools, dim candlelight. Outside, carriages pass over cobblestones. Inside, a customer exchanges coins for a measure poured from a large glass container. No ceremony. No philosophical symposium, just transaction. The warmth of gin spreads quickly, faster than small beer, faster than diluted wine. Urban life moves at a different pace than rural life. Crowded streets, factory noise beginning to rise, and strong spirits match that intensity. The gin craze does not invent alcohol. It highlights something new. When distillation meets dense cities and economic strain, patterns shift. Governments respond. Regulation begins to formalize. Licensing systems, tax structures, control mechanisms. Alcohol moves further into the realm of policy, from forest fruit to monastery ale, to rum aboard ships, and now to small glass measures in urban shops. The story grows more complex, still quiet, still shaped by yeast and grain and sugar, but now also shaped by law. And as night settles over London's brick streets, the city hums softly. Gin glasses empty, candles flicker, and the slow conversation between alcohol and society continues. We have traveled far, from fallen fruit in warm forests, to clay jars buried in earth, to ships rolling over dark oceans, to crowded city streets. Now we pause, and we ask gently, why? Why does fermentation appear again and again in nearly every civilization? The answer is not dramatic. It begins in the body. Alcohol, once consumed, moves quickly through the bloodstream. It reaches the brain. There, it changes communication between nerve cells. One of the chemicals involved is dopamine. Dopamine is often called a reward messenger. It is released when something feels good, when we eat, when we laugh, when we connect with others. Alcohol can increase dopamine release, that soft lift in mood, that slight warmth, that gentle loosening of tension. It also affects GABA, another messenger that slows brain activity. This creates relaxation. Muscles ease. Thoughts feel less sharp around the edges. The world softens. Not erased, just softened. For early humans, this effect may have felt surprising. For later civilizations, it became familiar. Relaxation has value, especially in societies shaped by hard labor, uncertainty, or long winters. But the biological effect is only part of the story. Humans are social creatures. We gather, we talk, we tell stories, we mark time together. Alcohol, in moderate amounts, can reduce social anxiety. It lowers inhibitions just enough to encourage speech. Laughter comes more easily. A shared drink becomes a shared signal. We are safe here. We are together. This pattern appears across cultures. In Sumer, beer after work. In Greece, wine at the symposium. In medieval villages, small beer by the hearth. In Mesoamerica, pulque at ritual gatherings. In African communities, sorghum beer at ceremonies. Different plants, same social glue. Alcohol also becomes tied to ritual. Birth, marriage, harvest, victory, mourning. It marks transitions. At weddings, it celebrates union. At funerals, it eases grief. The same substance can accompany joy and sorrow. There is something symbolic in fermentation itself. Sugar transformed. Time required. Invisible forces at work. Fermentation mirrors human life in quiet ways. We too change over time. We too are shaped by unseen processes. Perhaps this is part of why fermentation appears almost everywhere humans settle. Because the ingredients are common. Fruit, grain, honey, sap, and yeast is everywhere. If a society grows crops rich in sugar or starch, fermentation is almost inevitable. It does not require advanced science, only patience. So, across continents, without contact, humans discovered similar transformations, and then shaped them into culture. But there is balance. We have seen societies that valued moderation. Greece diluted wine. Rome measured rations. Mesoamerican cultures restricted who could drink heavily. Medieval Europe brewed weak, small beer for daily use. Humans have long understood that alcohol can warm, but also overwhelm. So rules form, customs form, ritual structures form. The drink becomes part of order, not just escape. Now, imagine a quiet evening. No specific era, Just a small gathering. Cups passed around, not rushed. Conversation drifting. A gentle warmth spreading through the body. The stars above steady and distant. From prehistoric fruit under the sun to distilled spirits shaped by fire, alcohol has traveled with us. Not because it is necessary for survival, but because it touches something steady in human experience. Relaxation, connection, ritual, and the simple curiosity of transformation. Yeast meeting sugar, change unfolding slowly, and humans again and again pausing to taste what time has made. We have crossed rivers. We have walked through vineyards. We have stood in stone kitchens and on wooden ships. Now we go back, not forward, back to a forest floor, fallen fruit, warmth of the sun resting on split skins, quiet trees, before cities, before pottery, before gods of wine or beer. There was fruit lying in grass. There was sugar. There was yeast in the air. And there were humans, walking slowly, watching carefully. The long arc of fermentation does not begin with intention. It begins with noticing. A taste that felt different, a warmth that lingered, a softness in the edges of the day. From that small noticing, something stretched across thousands of years. Clay jars in Neolithic villages, rice and honey resting in stillness, barley bubbling beside the rivers of Mesopotamia, grapes crushed and buried in cool earth, beer handed to pyramid builders, wine diluted in Greek symposia, rum measured carefully aboard ships, sorghum shared beneath wide African skies, spirits rising through glass shaped by fire. Each culture discovering the same quiet transformation. Sugar becoming alcohol. Time becoming change. Humans have always lived beside transformation. Seeds becoming plants. Milk becoming cheese. Grain becoming bread. And fruit becoming something stronger. Fermentation is not loud. It does not announce itself. It works quietly, like history itself. Civilization grew, cities rose, trade routes formed, laws were written, and somewhere in nearly every place a vessel sat in the corner. A jar, a barrel, a skin bag. Something holding liquid that had once been sweet. Alcohol has not been the center of civilization, but it has often been nearby, a companion, present at feasts, present at rituals, present at endings, sometimes misused, often regulated, frequently shared, but always part of the story. And now we return fully. Picture the forest again, fallen fruit in soft grass, warmth of the sun, a human hand reaching down, curiosity, a taste, a pause. That small moment stretches forward into clay cups, wooden barrels, crystal glasses, into candlelit rooms. So let us end there. Not in a palace, not in a tavern, but in a quiet room. A simple clay cup resting on a wooden table. Candlelight flickering gently against rough walls. the flame steady, the room still. The cup holding liquid shaped by time and unseen life. Outside, the night is calm. Inside, the warmth lingers softly. Fallen fruit, warm sun, quiet forests. A clay cup in candlelight. The long arc of fermentation resting for a moment. And then stillness.